Hey, it's Andrew here at BTO Range, Conroe, Texas again. Today on the bench, we have this Bergara B-14 rifle here. And one of the services that we offer here at BTO Range for our in-store customers is we'll live sight in a customer's rifle for them. And we're fortunate enough to have a fairly substantial 100-yard indoor range here in the building, so that we can sight these guns in without having to go somewhere, or without worrying about weather or rain or cold or sleet and snow or any of those postal service problems that that you might have. So we just wanted to go over what we do when we sight in a rifle. Mounting the scope, setting the zero stops, that type of stuff. So when this customer brought this rifle in, he had mounted this scope on an incorrect scope base, and it actually sheared off to the scope mount screws in the receiver. And we've drilled those out and ran the tap through them to make sure that the holes were good to go. And we've remounted the scope correctly. So we've got a Bergara B-14 chambered for 7mm PRC here. The customer scope is this Vortex Viper PST of 5-25, and we've mounted that on a DNZ Freedom Reaper pick rail with the customer's rings that they had. So one of the things about Vortex is they use, depending on which scope line or which scope model it is, there are different zero stops within the Vortex line. So the Vortex Viper PST shares a zero stop with the Vortex Razor, the RZR zero stop. So one of the, I guess, frustrating things is you have to set the scope of the zero stop up before you take it to the range. Otherwise, you're just going to have to shoot it again. So here's what we do when we set one of these rifles up. So when the rifle comes in, we did the machine work, that beside the point. But if we didn't have to do that, we're going to clean the bore. We're going to set the action screws to the manufacturer's torque value before we ever get to the range. We're going to take the scope off. We're going to remount the scope. We're going to check the base screws, and we typically torque these. If there's not a published manufacturer spec, we're going to torque those to about 30 inch-pounds, with the exception of the front two screws on an X-bolt, which are a little different. So we're going to mount the scope back up. We're going to go 30 inch-pounds or manufacturer's recommendation on the ring screws to the base, and then the top ring screws that screw the scope rings together. I'm having difficulty today for some reason. We typically are going to go 18 to 20 inch-pounds on these. If you talk to any scope manufacturer rep, Vortex, Loophole, doesn't matter, they're going to say that the number one cause of scopes being returned for internal problems is people over torque these rings, and they'll Loctite these rings down and they'll torque them up to 25 or 30 inch-pounds, and things will come loose inside the scope ring. So 18 to 20 is typically where that's going to live. A lot of manufacturers have that mounted or have that inscribed on the ring, what the torque value should be. And nowadays, the better rings, the better scope rings, typically don't need to be lapped. They don't need excessive torque or any of that, and they hold just fine even on the larger calibers like this 7 PRC. One of the things we see quite a bit of when the scope comes in and it's been mounted carelessly, maybe the better word, is that these rings aren't level. We'll see a large gap on this side and no gap on this side. So we'll level all that out. We'll level the scope before we ever go out to the range with it. So on this particular rifle, to set the zero stop for this RZR type zero stop, that'll be the PST series Vortex and the Vortex Razors. You have to set the zero stop first and then disconnect the turret, and we're going to actually shoot the rifle with the elevation turret off the gun for this particular zero stop. Now, Night Force is different, Leopold zero stops are different, even the other Vortex models are different. So even though we've done a ton of these, I always, just for my own peace of mind, before we start to set up one of these rifles to shoot, we'll take a look in the manual or on the online manual to make sure that we're setting the zero stop correctly. So first things first, we've got to engage the zero stop to zero. So on this RZR type zero stop, we're going to, with the turret completely attached to where it clicks, we're going to run it all the way in the downward position until we hit a hard stop. So that's to the zero stop. So on this particular scope, that would be clockwise. So we're going to turn this all the way down to where we reached a hard stop. So now 2 millimeter, these are 2 millimeter screws, so a 2 millimeter hex wrench. We're going to, there are 3 screws on the cap. They don't need to come all the way out. And normally this is not the bench we do this on. There's a rifle vise on our scope bench in the front. But the light's not as good there and the camera setup's not as good there, so we're doing this one back here. So they don't have to come all the way out, just enough to bring this elevation cap off, completely off the rifle. And now there are other screws right here in the side of this elevation turret. So the same 2 millimeter wrench, we're going to loosen these up. And what we're doing here is we're disconnecting the click mechanism or the detent mechanism on the elevation adjustment. And again, we're not trying to remove this, we're just trying to loosen it. So now we've got it loose, and we've got it loose to where this will just turn freely. Now it's got, you can probably see it if I've turned the rifle this way. So we have the markings here on the side of this turret, and when we turn it, so that's going to correspond to the same values that are on the side of the turret here, right? So one click or one hash mark is going to be a quarter MOA. And that's another thing that we have trouble sometimes explaining what MOA, minute of angle, actually means, and that it's a distance-based thing. So ostensibly a minute of angle is considered to be an inch. It's actually more like 1.1 inches at 100 yards. But it's very much a distance-based thing. So that's 2.2 inches at 200 yards. It's a little over half an inch at 50 yards. So the click values, how much the bullet or how much the scope moves or the turret alignment moves per click is dependent upon the distance to the target from where you are. So a lot of people will under adjust the scope, I guess, if they're shotting at 100 yards or taking a shot at 300 yards. They still move those clicks based on 4 clicks to an inch, and that's not true at 300 yards at all. So you have to do that little bit of math or have a dope chart on that. So the scope is now ready. What we would do at this point is this particular gun has a muzzle brake, removable muzzle brake on the end of it. Most of the time, a bore sighter spud or a collimator spud is not long enough to get all the way through that muzzle brake. So the next thing that we would do is we would actually pull the muzzle brake off of the gun, use a bore sighter to bring the reticle in alignment with the bore, and then go shoot it on the range. So we're going to do that real quick, then we're going to come back and reset this scope up. Okay, well, we're back off the range. Fortunately, that's maybe, I don't know, 60 feet from here, the entrance to the range. So again, we're fortunate in that regard. And we do a lot of this stuff. Well, last year we sighted in a little over 300 rifles for other people. So I mean, it's a major part of what we do almost on a daily basis here at BTO Range. So we're sighted in. We've got our muzzle brake we put back on before we went and shot it. And these Bergara rifles, man, they almost invariably shoot really, really well. This is 7 PRC. That's 2 rounds. You can tell from the back there's 2 bullet holes right there. So that's 2 rounds right at just a little under an inch high right there in the bullseye at 100 yards. So we're pretty happy with that. So now we're going to finish up setting the scope up. The first thing that we're going to do, and before we bring it off of the range, because this is a freewheeling turret now, there are no detents. So once we have it zeroed in, we look and we see where we're at. We're right at on the hash mark label 21. So in case we inadvertently move it, bringing it back here from the range, we would put it back. So we're going to engage the detents now. So that's again with a 2mm. We're going to bring these screws back in, and they just need to be a little better than finger tight. You don't need to put any kind of, in fact, I use the wrench this way because that limits the amount of torque that I can even accidentally put on the screws. We're going to do all 3 of them all the way around. A lot of people try to turn these 2 screws here on the top. They are 2mm also. You don't need to touch those at all. So now we're going to take our turret cap, just verify that we're still on the 21 where we were. We're going to index the turret cap to the 0 marking here on the outer ring. So sometimes there is a little bit of difficulty in getting that turret cap to seat all the way because of the air. A lot of these are O-ring sealed, so that we trap air at the top. When that happens, I will take one of these Allen screws completely out of the ring to allow the air to escape, and that way I can seat my turret all the way. So let's do that just real quick. The scope manufacturer says don't take that out, just so you don't lose it. But sometimes it is helpful to make sure you have the turret cap all the way seated squarely. So we've gotten that done. Now we're going to reseat our turret caps. Now you can, if you want, you can do a little bit of a set your scope up, set your scope turret up before you completely bring it back to this position, to where you have a few clicks of available downward movement. I typically don't do that unless the customer specifically requests we do that. So it's the same thing with these 3 outer screws here. So now we're adjustable up. We can adjust up as far as we want, and it comes down to a hard stop right at that 0. So you can't come underneath where your 0 is. So now that 0 stop is set, the turret is indexed at 0 for the customer. We would do the same thing with the windage dial. Now we didn't have to move the windage at all to zero this rifle in, so it is set at 0 now, and there's no stop underneath that, but we can index the turret. If we'd had to move it however many clicks either way, we would loosen the 3 caps on the turret, index the actual turret knob to the 0, and then reset it again. That way we're at 0 and 0, and our 0 stop is set, our turret is set, and the rifle is good to return to the customer. Again, we do this a bunch with a bunch of different scopes. All the 0 stops are different, so Night Force is a little bit easier to do, but this is still an excellent 0 stop. The only 0 stop that I really have difficulty with are the lesser Vortex models that have the brass shims that go under the elevation turret. I wish they'd do away with that particular 0 stop, but those scopes are still out there. So anyway, that is setting up how we set up a rifle and shoot it in for a customer, and we'll probably do, it's still warm, we'll probably do a couple of more of these with different rifle and scope combinations, and then discussing how to correctly mount the scope to begin with. We didn't show you the scope mounting process, how we do that. So that'll be good for another video in and of its own right, so they don't get too long. Again, thanks for watching our channel. We really appreciate it. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Let us know what you think. Send us a comment if there's something that you want us to take a look at or something that you want to see us address here on the channel. We'd be more than happy to do it. Check out our other videos, and we appreciate it. Have a good day.